Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear? In the back? Okay. How's that? Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome. I'm Karen Friedman Quinn, the Programming Associate here at Wilton Library. I'm so pleased to see you all here for this Kristallnacht Commemoration. When I began planning this program months ago, I knew it was about a topic that would resonate with the Wilton community, and we would probably fill our Brubeck room to capacity. But the registration numbers kept growing to 421 when I decided last Friday to close registration down. My sincere thanks to the library's executive director, Caroline Mandler, and the Library Board of Trustees for their unwavering support of this program. And my thanks to Michael Bellicosa, for his generous mentorship, and to the staff who truly know the meaning of teamwork. We owe a huge thank you to Robin Landau, Director of Programs at the Connecticut organization Voices of Hope, for suggesting this program and bringing us tonight's speaker, Ruth Weiner.
Weiner.
I'm sorry, Ruth Weiner. Robin will tell you more about the Voices of Hope mission and their host of educational programs, especially for children and young people, when she speaks. We're here tonight to hear a witness talk about her experience as a young girl in Vienna, Austria, during the Night of Broken Glass in November 1938. When the Nazi government of Germany launched a state-sponsored pogrom against its Jewish citizens by destroying Jewish homes, businesses, possessions, and synagogues, and rounding up 30,000 Jewish men and marching them off to concentration camps. It is a day to remember the dangers of prejudice, authoritarianism, and baseless hatred, which, unleashed by the Nazis and their collaborators, led to the death of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. There were other groups targeted by the Nazis as well. Black people in Germany, civilians who were non-Jewish, accused of disobedience, resistance, or partisan activity, gay men, bisexual men, and other men accused of homosexuality in Germany, Jehovah's Witnesses, people with disabilities, Polish people, political opponents and dissenters in Germany, Roma and other people derogatorily labeled as gypsies, social outsiders in Germany derogatorily labeled as asocials or professional criminals, and Soviet prisoners of war. As Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel believed, whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. So those who hear us continue to bear witness for us. Until now, they're doing it with us. At a certain point in time, they will do it for all of us. We hope that you will go forth from this program tonight as a witness for the 6 million whose voices were silenced. Learn from a witness, become a witness, so it never happens again. Please welcome Robin Landau from Voices of Hope.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? I'm Robin Landau, Voices of Hope's Director of Programming. Our broad mission is to promote a culture of courage to stand up against hatred through Holocaust and genocide education and remembrance. We are the premier provider of Holocaust education to Connecticut students, teachers, and communities. After playing an instrumental role with much support and leadership from your own Tony Boucher, we helped get the state mandate passed in 2018 requiring Holocaust and genocide education in Connecticut schools' social studies curriculum. Voices of Hope's program, the HERO, or Holocaust Education Resource and Outreach Center, has reached over 26,000 students and educators in 88 schools throughout our state with innovative programming, including survivor and descendant testimony, impactful curriculum and projects, an online museum, professional development, and travel opportunities. Voices of Hope is especially impactful and personal because our education is grounded in the stories and experiences of local Connecticut families. In fact, this past year, our speaker, Ruth Weiner, spoke to over 2,400 students in the Norwalk Public Schools. In a thank you note, the school wrote, and I quote, "The impact of your visit has been profound and has left an indelible mark on the students." Ruth is a powerful speaker, and I know that you too will be left changed by what you hear tonight. As Karen mentioned, the Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel said, "If you listen to a witness, you become a witness." And becoming a witness endows you with responsibility. Students who receive Holocaust education have proven to honor this responsibility, and study shows that they are more likely to speak out against bias and prejudice than students who have not received this education. I believe that hearing Ruth tonight will have the same impact on all of you, and this is why Voices of Hope also focuses on educating the greater community. Our robust community programming reaches thousands of people every year through commemorative events throughout the year, a speaker series, film screenings, and local and international travel opportunities. In a time in which hatred vitriol is spread to millions in seconds through a push of a button, Voices of Hope's commitment to utilizing historical knowledge and experience to address contemporary issues is more important than ever before. The brutal attack of October 7th, 2023 marked the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. While we are always careful in making comparisons to the Holocaust, this past year's unprecedented growth of anti-Semitism and the powerful force of disinformation are trends that require us to sound an alarm and focus Holocaust and genocide education on the dangers of normalizing anti-Semitism and hatred and fighting propaganda. Voices of Hope stands in a unique position to work with students, educators, and community members to shine a light on these issues and to help them make a connection between historical and current events. I encourage you to utilize the tools we provide in your community. Please reach out to us and we will work with your schools and communities to provide whatever programming is needed. There are sign-up sheets in the, I guess that's actually technically the front of the room, and some flyers that tell a little bit more about our program. And I encourage you all to please put your name and contact information on them. And I would also like to acknowledge a couple of other people in the room. We have our president, Adele Jacobs, who's right over there. We have another staff member, Jamie Seltzer, Director of Development. She's right here. And we have another board member, Jeff Israel, who's right there. I now invite you to listen to tonight's speaker, Ruth Weiner, and to become a witness.
Thank you, and thank you, Robin, for all of those kind words. No pressure there whatsoever. Let me ask you just one thing. This is kind of an unusual audience arrangement, and I'm told that I have a bad habit of dropping my voice at the ends of sentences, never mind what happens at the ends of paragraphs. If you're at the back and you cannot hear me, please send your hands up, just way up high, and I will be looking for that, and I will try not to do that. In getting ready for this event, a couple of things happened. The first was that when I was invited to come to Wilton, and I was told that there might be 100, 150 people, that sounded wonderful, really. That was a very good group. And I had an ulterior motive because two of the most adorable children who live in this area are my great-grandchildren who live in Weston. And how could I possibly go to Wilton and then not go to Weston, where we are known as Saba Rabba and Safta Rabba. That's the Hebrew for great-grandpa and great-grandma. And that is probably the most important roles that we play. So that was kind of the number one priority. And then I discovered that the next priority, which is all of you wonderful people, were increasing, and that this thing was really developing, and that it had to be stopped at 400, to me is absolutely mind-blowing. And in our preparations for this event, we were talking, what are we really doing? What are we offering for this amazing group of people? And we said stories. All we have is stories. So let me begin with a story that's a little bit off what we had discussed, but very important. And it has to do with the true meaning of voices of hope. Who were the real voices of hope? And I can tell you, the years are the late 1940s. My mother, Edith Frosch is her name, was working as the immigration worker for the Hartford area Jewish Family Service. And this was a time of just heartbreaking things, people trying to find their families, and then on the opposite end of it, wonderful things where families were actually found, and they came to Hartford. And Hartford was a very receptive city, and there were many people who came in, and the city just stepped, the Jewish community for the most part, but even others, stepped up, and they began to receive these people. And my family, and I'm an only child, so it was my father and me, became very much part of this process. And we met a wonderful young couple. His name was Fred Jacobs. His wife's name was Regina. His sister's name was Regina. His sister's husband's name was Sam, and they had a brother whose name was Julius, and Julius had a wonderful friend whose name was Joe, and they came as a group, and they stayed as a very tight-knit little cluster. They were a family. They even lived together excuse me, for a while. And we got to know them very, very well. And Fred and Regina Jacobs were two of the most wonderful people that I have ever met. We loved them, they loved us. And why am I telling you this story? Because these people and their friends, and they all stayed close, they all helped each other. These people faced life. The ones who weren't married got married. They had beautiful babies. They bought houses. They went to work. They earned enough money to start businesses. They were the voices of hope. And what do they have to do with the organization? They founded it. They founded it. They were the ones who said, you know what? We've lived through these things which are the worst that human beings can do to each other. And yet, we now have lives. And they made a complete comeback. And Fred Jacobs, with the help of Regina, founded the organization. It now has yearly events at the state capitol that are highly moving. If you haven't been to one, find out more about it and go. I think you will find it very worth your while. They helped found the organization that does the outreach. They themselves overcame the limitations that were within them for talking about their own experiences, and they went forward. They were the voices of hope. And I would like to embarrass a dear friend of mine whom I've known all her life. Adele, may I invite you to please stand up? Wherever you are, I can't see you, you've moved. There she is, right over there. Right over there. Adele Jacobs, may I introduce her to you? She is a fine lawyer, a beautiful wife and mother. She's the chair of Connecticut Voices of Hope and the proud daughter of Fred and Regina Jacobs. Okay, and I did that for Fred and Regina. Their story so deserves to be told, so deserves to be told. Let me talk a little bit about Kristallnacht. First of all, I have a problem with the name. I have a big problem with the name. When I was very little, my grandmother always said a beautiful table, and it was very clear that I was too little to use the crystal. The crystal was on the table, the glasses, the bowls, the plates. I had glass until I was about, I don't know, 4 or 5, whatever. I guess whatever I learned to eat without breaking anything. And so to me, if something was crystal, that was very special and very beautiful. The event was not called Kristallnacht until later on. And I guess for someone who was speaking about it, that became a realistic metaphor for the glass in the street. But I can't tell you about the glass in the street. I refer to it, by the way, just so that you know, as the 10th of November, which is when it took place in Vienna. And you've heard a little bit about what the causes were for it. Vienna, the German towns were hit and cities were hit on the 9th, and it was primarily something that occurred in the evening. In Vienna, it occurred the next day, the 10th, and it was known as, excuse me, as the 10th of November, okay? Let me set a little bit of background for you. In March of 1938, Hitler invaded Austria, and invaded is the correct term. It's known as the Anschluss. And Anschluss in German is a very mild kind of a word. An Anschluss is if I do this with my hands, that's an Anschluss. I just made a connection, okay? It's the closing of something. And it was sold to the Austrians as, you know, here you've had rather turbulent a political history for the last decade or so. You've got a culture that's still getting over, believe it or not, the First World War. They didn't know it was the first one, but it was the First World War. You're definitely getting over something that's a generational pain. And that's the notion that you're no longer the heart and soul of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the dominating element of all of Central Europe. And I can tell you that even as a child growing up, that was very much a present thought that the people of the older generation, that was what they talked about. That's how they saw themselves. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in the back of your minds. And when Hitler first took over in Germany, that also was not something that happened suddenly. That had all kinds of causalities. And what he had been doing, and I strongly urge you, if you're at all interested in that, find yourself some good sources. There are so many of them, and read up on it. Read up on it. It's a terribly dangerous process of how do you gain control over a country, over a government, over the mentality of a people, so that it's possible for you to assume complete power. It's an issue worth examining. And Hitler wrote the playbook. He wrote the playbook. And part of that playbook was this Anschluss with Austria. Where have we heard this before? Well, we speak the same language, and there are a lot of people in Austria who really love German culture more than they love the Austrian culture, and they really want to be part of this. So it came March, I believe it was 12th or 13th, and all of a sudden, every building, every major building in Vienna burst out in red bunting with swastikas on it. I'm just curious, hands, people who've been to Vienna. Wow. Okay. Then I don't have to describe it for you, but I will anyway. It's a beautiful city. It's a very ancient city. It's a city that's filled with palaces, with museums, all of them huge examples of hugely beautiful architecture, beautiful gardens, lots of pocket parks, wide streets, and unbelievable culture. And to be a young girl in Vienna at that time was really to have every opportunity that you possibly could. Just for the record, I was born in 1931. I will spare you the arithmetic. I'm 93, pushing 94. Thank you. Thank you very much. But I'm raising that right now because the question that I'm asked so often is, how do you still remember? Right? Everything from here on in is stuff that I remember. Memories are very strange things. I've been blessed with being able to retain a lot of memories. And the things that I'm going to describe for you, I have gone out of my way to verify in as many ways as I can. And I'll tell just a very little story. Is the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunity, state of Connecticut. Please don't ask me why they did this, but they wanted Holocaust material, and they taped me for 2 hours. Crazy. But the filmmaker who then took those 2 hours and brought them down to a manageable amount of time did an amazing piece of research with Viennese resources. And this is where I'm going. When I saw what she had done, she had, taken my story and found the visuals to go with it. And they were exactly the way that I remembered them. When she talked about the skating rink where I learned how to skate, it was there. When she talked about the park where I went, it was there. And when you see something like that, it does give you some confidence that what you're getting is accurate. So please take it as that. Then there's a second piece to that. I think almost any Holocaust survivor that you talk to will tell you the same thing, that your childhood went right out the window within the most 48 hours after Hitler marched into wherever you lived. If you wanted to survive, you became an adult. Because the things that I'm going to tell you from here on in, you're going to say, she was a young kid. No, I wasn't. Okay. The Vienna that I'm describing now then became peopled with a totally different population. First of all, it was loaded with people in uniforms. What were the uniforms? Well, there was, of course, the German army. They had all marched in. There was the SS in black suits. You cannot hear? Okay, thank you. There was the SS. Thank you, I appreciate that. There was the SS in black suits. There was the SA, and they were the elites. They were the elites. You watched out for them. There was the SA. They were in khaki, and they had done heavy recruiting from locals, and they had really recruited from some of the scum of the earth. They were terrible, terrible people. Then, if they were younger, there was the Hitler Youth. And if you were a child, that was who you worried about. The 16 and the 17-year-olds who wore short pants and knee socks, even when it was cold, and had a special uniform. And their task was to make your life as miserable as they possibly could, okay? A question I was asked by a lovely little 13-year-old from an inner city school who came up to me after a presentation. And he said, Mrs. Weiner, is it true that they actually shot Jews in the street for no reason at all? A 13-year-old, okay? And I don't lie to the kids. And I said to him, yes. And that was a day when that was what was going on, okay? And you know, of course, of what was going on with businesses and with people in the street. So that's the setting now. So let me tell you about me. When I was in first grade in public school was when the Anschluss occurred. And a few days after the Anschluss, this is what happened to me. How did I know my life had changed? Probably forever. I had a good friend. Her name was Kitty. And Kitty fell and broke her arm and had one of these plaster casts, all the way down, really disabling. And the teacher said, you know what, Ruth, I went to school already knowing how to read and write. German is a phonetically reliable language. I'm sure my 3-year-old grandson will, if he was speaking German, he would already know how to read. Well, all right, maybe when he's 4. But it's a phonetically reliable language. I knew how to read and write. I became Kitty's right hand, okay? And we were good friends. And one day Kitty comes into school, and I help her off with her jacket, and she spits in my face. Yeah, exactly. And I have to tell you, I can feel it. I can feel the goosebumps to this day. It's funny how feelings do stay with you. It was, and I did what a 7-year-old would do. I broke into tears, and the teacher came over to see what had happened, and she kind of straightened things out, and from that day on, I understood that my life was not going to be the same. And very shortly thereafter, Jewish children were all expelled from public schools and had to attend the Jewish school. To attend the Jewish school, you had to ride 2 streetcars. Streetcars are the mode of public transportation in Vienna to this day. It's a very nice way of traveling, by the way. Works well and ecologically very sound. But we had to take 2 streetcars, and then we had to walk quite a distance. So this is how we went to school. And I'd like you to think just for a moment, again, to get a sense of things. What parent would allow a 2nd grader in New York, okay, they're 8 years old, to get on two streetcars, 2 buses. I don't think they have streetcars in New York, but 2 buses in New York or 2 subways in New York, and then walk many blocks by themselves. Yeah, everybody's nodding. No, it was kind of not over my dead body kind of thing. But the families had to do that, and that is what they did with us. Let me put in one more component, and that's that my father, who had been politically active, to his great good luck, was arrested. Why was it his great good luck? Because a lawyer, a non-Jewish lawyer, who had been involved politically with him, went to the police, and it was the Vienna police that had arrested him, went to the police and said to them, "You have to keep this man here. You cannot send him off to the concentration camps." That is what they were doing with Jews. If Jews were arrested, they were very quickly sent on to either Dachau or Buchenwald, which were the 2 camps that were actively operating at that point. And because this lawyer came, my father was safe. He sat in jail. But it left my mother as a single parent. And what was more important to her than she knew she could send me, to do whatever was necessary, was to find a way for us to emigrate. And I won't go into that in too much detail. We don't have time. Let me get back to Kristallnacht. So now you've got me and my best friend. Her name was Dory. And we're getting on the bus in the morning, and it's November 10th, and we have no idea that anything special is going on, except that we noticed that there were way more uniforms in the streets than there normally were. And that was something that we were very much aware of. If you walked the streets, even if you were 8 years old, you learned how to make yourself invisible. And that meant that if way down at the end of the block, you saw, instead of a group of 2 uniforms, which was pretty normal, you saw 4 or 6 or 8, you crossed the street, or you went down a side street, or you went into a store, but you knew that something was brewing and you had better get out of the way. Okay? And you develop all kinds of survival mechanisms. Just as, unfortunately, when I say that in the street, that we made ourselves, when I said, in the inner city, that we're in the street and we made ourselves invisible, the heads are going up and down. The kids know exactly what I'm talking about. Interesting. Anyway, So we knew something was up. When we got off the second trolley car in the Jewish section of the city, we had no question about something being up. We saw that they had made huge piles of books, and they were starting to set these books on fire. And that's something else. I'm sitting in a library. I'm a reader. I love to read. And I was already then. And to me, a book was something that you washed your hands before you touched it. It was so special. And you took good care of it. You took care of where you put it down. It didn't go on the floor. And the notion that somebody was burning them was one of the most shocking experiences of my childhood. It truly was. We made our way to school. We found the school surrounded by a bunch of hoodlums who had picked up the cobblestones that were in the street and piled them up. And somehow we worked our way through them and into the school. And they were picking up these cobblestones, they're about this size, and starting to throw them through the windows. And my classroom faced that front room, so I knew we were going to be in for trouble. But we came in, and we all gathered on the far side of the room as they're throwing the stones in. And needless to say, it was frightening. But, we hung in, and when we showed up in our classroom, they kept us all against the wall. And it got more dangerous and more dangerous, and eventually they just decided to dismiss us, and they dismissed us 2 at a time into an alley and had us work our way through the backs of the buildings and back to the trolley car. And by then we could see that the whole city was impacted by what was going on in the Jewish section. There were fires, there were stores being broken, there were people being arrested. Another thing that I hated was they would gather old people and children, and really the kind of people that I had been taught to be very respectful towards. It's, there's this conflict. They were gathering them, and they were giving them buckets and with water, and they were pasting these huge posters that they were using to promote the opera, concerts, announce people who had died, and they would paste them onto the cobblestones, and then they would make the people remove them with their fingernails, okay? And there are many pictures of this if you ever want to pull it up, although I don't know that you really want to look at it. And people's fingers very quickly would wind up bloodied, and they would call that Jewish nail polish. And they would stop people in the street and say, "Would you like some Jewish nail polish?" I mean, those were the kinds of how do you find ways of demeaning people? And there was a lot of that. And although I did not actually see it, people were getting shot in the street, people were getting arrested in the street. That was already going on. I got home, I found my mother in the apartment. She decided that we needed to go check on my grandparents, who lived a very short distance away. And we made our way very quickly to their house. They had my aunt and her husband, and they had a very young baby living with them. The baby was sick and had a very high temperature. That's an important thing, okay? And as we're there's this pounding on the door, and my grandmother opens it up, and I have to describe her to you. She was a very gentle lady, a very genteel lady, always nicely dressed, petite, and could fit in anywhere. She just had this wonderful way of dealing with people. And who was at the door but the son of a neighbor who was a Hitler Youth with a couple of other Hitler Youths. And they said, raus, raus, which means out. Okay, you have to get out of your apartment immediately. All the Jews are gathering on the 6th floor apartment building. All the Jews are being gathered on the 6th floor. And my grandmother, nicely dressed, goes like this, which was not a typical position for her. And she says, you know what? When you were a little boy and you were a sick baby, I came to your house and I helped your mother and I took care of you. And then I don't know where she got this. I changed your diaper. Okay? And he's got a couple of other guys there, you know, so this didn't do much for his image. And I was old enough to understand that, you know, Grandma, what are you saying? And he blushed bright red. And then she goes on to explain, now I have a baby in this house who's sick, and we're not leaving. If you want to bring other people into my house, you can, but we are not leaving. And I still remember that feistiness and that guts to this day. It worked. It worked. And once that was resolved, my mother and I walked back to our house. And I told you before about uniforms that people are wearing, right? Now, there's one I didn't tell you, and it's sort of stupid. It was the Gestapo. Now, Gestapo is an acronym for secret police. When you're secret police, you do not want everybody to recognize you immediately. But for some reason, they wanted to make sure that everybody understood how tremendously elite they were. And they wore either a belted raincoat, or if they could afford it, a leather belted coat, very elegant, and with a fedora hat. So we see two Gestapo guys leaning against the building across from our apartment building. And we rushed into the building and made it to our apartment and got in and slammed the door. And it wasn't more than a minute that we're in the apartment and we hear this unbelievable banging on the door. And we hear, open this door immediately if you know what's good for you. Well, we were not opening the door. And all we could think of is we hope this door, they don't bang this door down there, you know, two big guys. And we then spent the next either 6 or 7 hours, I don't know exactly, sitting in what was our living room, not saying a word. Okay, my mother was sitting in her armchair knitting for as long as it was light. I was sitting on a little brown corduroy pillow. The floor's parquet, and I was able to slide around. As long as it was light, I got myself a book and I was able to read. Once it got dark, I got myself a paper and pencil, and my mother and I exchanged notes back and forth. It was pretty awful. But what made it worse was that we had a ringing telephone. And in those days, the telephone was a little machine thing that was on the wall. And the way you answered it was with I don't even know what you would call it. What do you call this thing? A receiver, thank you. With a receiver. I haven't used that word in a long time. With a receiver, okay? And every time it rang, of course, it raised the anxiety level. Was there something wrong with my father in jail? Had there been a problem? Was there something wrong with my grandparents that had to be dealt with? What was this all about? And the knocking on the door continued. And what we would hear is every time they finished a bout of knocking was the sound of boots walking away. But these are smart guys, so are they boots walking away, or are they just stamping to make us think that we're walking away? Well, finally, my mother just couldn't stand it anymore. And after the phone had rung several times, she picked it up. And it was the lawyer that I had mentioned to you earlier, who was really saving my father's life as we were going along. And he said to her, "Don't say a word. You have the Gestapo outside your door." My mother luckily didn't say, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "Now here's what I want you to do. I'm going to come, and when they walk away, they are walking away. When they walk away, I'm going to knock 3 times. And I want you to be ready with your hat and coat on, and someplace where you can pin a swastika on the coat. And I want you to put a hat and coat on the child and tell her she's going to have to wear a swastika too, and give her a doll or a toy that she can hold in one hand." And I'll tell you in a minute what that was about. I mean, I was 8 years old. And sure enough, there was the usual knocking and the usual walking sound. And just a minute or two, I mean, he must have been standing in the hallway just out of sight. 3 knocks. We are ready to go. We are out that door as quickly as you can imagine. He pins his wife's swastika on my mother. He pins a little swastika with an Edelweiss, which is a little white mountain flower that they had for children. He pinned that on me. And then he takes my hand. Why? So that as we're walking, that I do not have to give the Heil Hitler salute. He just was not willing to trust me. He didn't think I could handle that one. And he was probably correct. And then came what had to be one of the bizarrest experiences of my life, which was that the 3 of us are walking like we're going for a lovely little evening stroll down what was kind of the main street of the area where we lived. And you know, there were fires still burning. There was glass all over the street. It was a terrible thing. And he took us to his house, and they gave us something to eat. And I finished the night in bed with his little girl. And I make sure to tell that story whenever I speak to the kids, because I think it's important to know that with all the dastardly deeds, all the terrible things that happened, there were people, there were good people, there were brave people. There were people, they were not common, but they existed, who were willing to really put themselves at risk and put themselves out. And they saved, I think they saved our lives. Now, we're going to go to questions in a minute, but I have to add just one little postscript. What year was it, Nate? Help me out. I can't hear you. 2005. 2005, we decided we're going to go to Vienna with our grandson, okay, who insists that he wants to see the apartment, rightly so. Well, or I said, okay, not going to, pardon me?
Was that the first time back to Vienna?
Yes, I've been back to Vienna several times. And so now how do we get into the building, which is a locked building, because we're right behind somebody who's got a fob, and he's pretty quick. Well, no, I'm not going to say it. Okay, we got into the building. We did get into the building, and we got up to the floor where we were, and truly, I had wondered up to that time, how in God's name did they not knock that door down? They were breaking down other doors in our apartment building. What was it? Was it some divine intervention or what? And we go straight to the door of the apartment. I had no problem finding it. And I discovered, and I'll explain why, that door was made out of metal. It was a huge, solid door made out of metal. And the reason for it, if you figure why one door made out of metal and none of the other doors, it was because the building, and this is very common, by the way, for Viennese buildings, that the lower floor, or even lower floors, bottom floors, are used for businesses, offices perhaps, and then the upper floors are used for apartments. And what had happened was that this was a nice, spacious office, and somebody decided they're going to turn it into an apartment, but they never took away the metal door. So I can tell you that I owe my life to, and this is not uncommon. You want me to introduce Nate? He discovered it. You want to stand up, Nate? No. You can meet him afterwards. But no, I really owe my life to the goodness of a human being and a metal door.
The first question is, did your parents survive?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have included. We were very, very fortunate. We were able to get out through separate things. I was able to get out through the auspices of the Kindertransport. My mother was able to get out because the British had a special program for domestic servants. And if you were fortunate enough to be accepted into that program, you got to be a maid on a farm. Okay, and this was my mother, who had been the daughter of a factory owner, and since he didn't have a son, she succeeded him in running the factory. But she did okay with the animals. And my father got out through something very unusual, and I'm going to give you the name, and again, it's worth doing a little research on, called Kitchener Camp, where they brought a group of just randomly selected men to a former British Army camp, and they were still behind barbed wire, but they were in England. Okay, and all three of us were eventually reunited in England. It was during the time of the London Blitz, so it was it was an interesting experience. And then we eventually were able to come to America.
Can you talk a little bit more about your experience in the Kindertransport?
No, and I'll tell you why. This is not commonly known. Kindertransport for Vienna was a very tight operation. There was only one transport. And that, if you want to read a wonderful book, I'm in the library, I know you can get hold of it. It's called The Last Train to London. The author's name is Meg Waite, W-A-I-T-E, Clayton. And if you have a teenager, this is a great book for a teenager because the main characters are teens. And it is a...
Excuse me 1 second, just so you know, we do have that book in the library.
Oh, the library's got it. Call them quick. I'd like to reserve. And if not, they'll get it from a library out of town, right? Into library loan. And they're going to wonder, why do all these people want to read this book? It's because it's a really good book. She describes the actual factual parts of the Kindertransport based on unbelievable documentation. It's worth reading just for that. But then she does a wonderful fiction story of characters that she invents who are on the Kindertransport. So for anybody who's interested in Kindertransport, go read that book. Why am I of no help to you? Because I was never on an actual transport. But what they did do is they said, if you have a child who you want to get out and you think you can get that child to England, we'll take her from there. And that's exactly what they did. They had a family for me, and they took good care of me, and I was part of that organization, which was the British group that took care of the Kindertransport. There are many Kindertransport stories. It was an amazing effort. It was an amazing effort.
How long did it take to be reunited with your family?
Too long.
Were you in touch with the lawyer and or his family that helped you after the war?
No, and I feel very badly about that. And I'm not sure why. My parents were never in touch with him.
Okay.
Do you know if he survived?
I don't. No, I know nothing about him. And you know how bad it is? I don't even remember his name. I suspect I knew it at the time. He was, Mr. So-and-so. But there was just no contact after. The contact that we did have, and it's worth just, telling the little story, was that because my mother went to work, I had a nanny. And she was just wonderful, not Jewish. And after Hitler marched in, if you were not Jewish, it was worth your life to take a Jewish child into places where she was not supposed to be. Okay, you were going to get arrested, there was no question about it. And I can remember her standing in front of my father. Also, for some reason, this position is a position of strength for a woman. Don't ask me why, in Vienna. And I remember her standing in this position in front of my father, who had said, no, we had to stop these Saturday or Sunday afternoon jaunts to concerts, an unbelievable amount of children's activity, quality children's activities. And I loved every minute of it. And she said, no. She says, she's a daughter of Vienna. I heard all this. She's a daughter of Vienna. She's entitled to all of this. And I'm going to take her. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I'm going to take her. He said, okay. And we did. We continued going to all of these wonderful things. So that was, and her we stayed in close touch with and visited. Okay? Next.
Okay, next question. What would you most want people to take away from your story and how you've lived your life?
Wow. I don't know, how long do you have? I think it was maybe what Robin kind of alluded to at the beginning, okay? And I don't mean to stir up anxieties or I certainly don't mean to become political, and I won't. But that said, I think it behooves all of us, every single one of us, and there are a lot of us, to pursue what goes on in our environment, to not say, and I hear this from people. I do hear this from people. Oh, what's going on is so awful. I'm not going to turn on the news. I'm not going to read the newspaper. There's nothing I can do about it. Why involve myself? And that's a dangerous way to live, okay? That we're in a time where we need to be very aware of what goes on around us, what goes on in other places, what goes on in the rest of the world, because we're tied into it. And what happened here didn't happen that Hitler got up one morning and said, okay, I have it all planned out, now I'm going to make it happen. It happened day by day and week by week and year by year. And that's the message that I'd like to leave, that we all have to be tuned in. We have to be on guard.
And the next question, I think you've just answered. Why does your story continue to be relevant today?
That's an easy one. And no, really, and the kids that I talk to, they tell me this all the time, that if you choose to ignore history, you're going to have to repeat it. And this is not history that you can choose to ignore. This is an event, and I'm not saying that horrible things haven't happened throughout history, throughout time. But here they happened to a group of people where there was no conflict. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't about political disagreement. It wasn't about any of the rational things or quasi-rational things that we see happening where there are historical disasters. Okay? This happened because of who people were. And I can tell you this from personal experience, there is probably no group that is as diverse as the Jewish people. You want to see diversity, get to know Jewish people around the world. Very diverse, very diverse. And I see some heads that know what I'm talking about going up and down, and even in color, okay? And so it's very hard to, well, let me leave it at that.
Okay. The last written question that I have is, have you seen the movie with Jason Robards called The Reunion?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have not. But if you tell me, is it out there? Is it a good movie?
Yes.
It's a movie about a Holocaust survivor who's Jewish, who goes back to Europe to look up some of his Christian friends.
Oh,
The
okay.
episodes in that movie came right out of my grandfather's mouth.
Wow, okay. There's
Reunion with Jason Robards.
The Reunion. Is it a recent film?
It's a film, maybe 20 years old, and if the library doesn't have it, come forward.
All right. No, I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you. I'm very happy to hear that. Yeah. And let me return the favor. There's a wonderful Israeli movie, but it comes with English subtitles, called The Flat. Not The Apartment. Apartment is something else. This is called The Flat. Okay, make sure you get that right. And it's somewhat the same theme. And it's a wonderful movie. It's a real quality movie. Also an old movie. And I don't have any good suggestions as to where it's available, but I'm sure you'll find it.
Okay. If anyone else has a question, if you would please raise your hand, Robin will come to you, and then she will relay the question to Ruth.
This man right here is also recommending the book called In the Garden of Beasts, which gives a very good historical perspective of how this slowly came to be and took over Europe. So that was a suggestion. Ruth, what happened to your grandmother and your aunt and the baby?
Okay. Not a good story, okay? It had worked out that both my mother and my aunt, her sister, the only two daughters in the family, or two children in the family, both were able to get servant positions in England. A number of family members had already left, and my grandmother and my grandfather were the ones who were comforting the relatives, her brother, his brother, of their generation, because they knew each time they went to the railroad station, they called it a funeral. They knew they would never see those children and grandchildren again. I'm sorry, this is, you've hit on what's the hardest part. And my grandmother helped us get ready to leave right up to the last minute. One of the things she did was we had in her dining room two paintings that went back 3 generations, beautiful paintings of her great-grandparents, okay? And just as we were finishing packing, we're standing there, and she takes a kitchen knife, goes into the kitchen, takes a kitchen knife, slashes these gorgeous paintings out of their elaborate frames, okay? Rolls them up, hands them to my mother, and says, she has to know who she is. That's me. They hang in my dining room. And other members of the family have done a historical search on who the people are. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And so this was my grandmother, okay? And a week and a half before the 4 of us, my mother, my aunt, and my little cousin and me, were supposed to leave, my grandmother has a heart attack. And her doctor, who was also a good friend, said she died of a broken heart. I'm very sorry. And my grandfather was taken out of his apartment, was moved to the Vienna ghetto, and there really wasn't a Vienna ghetto up until the Nazis established one. Was moved to the Vienna ghetto. We have letters from him. He kind of put himself in charge of every family member who was left behind. He was that kind of a guy, and wrote about them. And ultimately was sent to Riga, where he was put to death. And I have to tell you something. There's nothing unusual about my story. There really isn't. That if you were to talk to any other survivor, and I didn't call myself a survivor for many years because I thought that term should be reserved for people who were in the camps. But if you talk to anybody who was either a refugee from the Holocaust or a camp survivor, the stories are so similar. They're so similar. They all ring true. They all ring the same.
Ruth, I can't thank you enough for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's something we couldn't have done without you.
Well,
Thank you.
happy to do it.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being a part of this program and for following all of our crazy rules. I'm so glad that this program went well, and I hope that you go forth and share Ruth's story with others you know.